All right. Our friend Steven Crowder has launched a new initiative called Stop Big Con. And in the video announcing the launch of the project, he talked about leaving the Blaze and all the different offers that he fielded from other conservative organizations and what he thought were the real problems with those offers. And that's led a lot of people to speculate about whether or not the Daily Wire is one of the people who made him an offer. In particular, are we the ones who made the offer that he put up on the screen and talked about at length? And the answer is yes, that offer did come from the Daily Wire. I'm not trying to hide that fact. I'm not ashamed of that fact. In fact, I think it's a very good offer. But I think there's a lot of sort of misconceptions about the nature of the offer, the nature of the points. I think Steven misunderstood a lot of the points. And so the way we do here at the Daily Wire, we're just going to be incredibly transparent. You know that we like to have our members be a part of the journey. We live stream all of our company town halls, for example. We just find that sunlight sometimes is the best disinfectant. And so with that in mind, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we came to be in conversations with Steven, how those conversations ended, and walk you just line by line through what the actual document that we sent over to him, a non-binding term sheet, what it actually said and why. First thing you should know is that I'm really miserable to be making this video. Steven's been my friend for 10 years. I think he's maybe the most talented person working in the conservative media space. He's one of the top entertainers in the country, politics notwithstanding, a great comic voice. And I find it really tragic that we're having this kind of a conversation. But it's also very important, I think, that we talk about it, in particular because I know a lot of people who are fans of the Daily Wire were really offended by the things that Steven said in the video, and they're concerned that maybe we're doing the wrong thing. And I think that by the time we finish this video, you'll understand what we were thinking with our term sheet and how we operate as a business a little bit better. I've wanted to be in business with Steven since the day that I met him. Ben and I tried to do some even movie deals with Steven before there was CRTV and before there was a Daily Wire. For that entire time, we've talked at length at various times about getting together and doing things. Of course, for most of that time, he's been under contract, first at CRTV and then at the Blaze. So we weren't able to. And from time to time during the years, we would get together and daydream a little bit about would there be a future for us to work together at the other end of that deal. We got word that Steven was finishing up his time at the Blaze and was interested in having a conversation with us. And so we reached out to his agent and we said, listen, we'd love to have a conversation. It's not every day that a monster talent like Steven comes on the market. We'd be bad businessmen if we didn't engage in a conversation with him. We weren't sure at that time if there was a deal to be had. I mean, for one thing, we're friends with Glenn, we're friends with Tyler, we're friends with all the guys at the Blaze. We weren't sure that we wanted to commit to making an offer to Steven. And Steven's an expensive talent. I mean, he's been in the business a long time. He has an enormous fan base, and we knew that it would take a lot of doing to get him over to the Daily Wire. This at the same time that we're investing very heavily in kids' entertainment content and making real television content, streaming scripted fiction like the Pendragon Cycle and Atlas Shrugged and other projects that we've taken on. Would we have the resources? We weren't sure. But again, you have to have the conversation, and we were happy to have it. So we reach out to the agent and we say that. We say, we'd like to have a conversation with Steven, kind of get into the details of what's he looking for? What's he looking for financially? What's he looking for in terms of structure? What would make his life better? What would make him happy? He's got this opportunity now to have a next chapter. What's he want that next chapter to be? And Steven's agent candidly just wasn't interested in any aspect of that conversation. He only wanted to know about the money. He said, we're not going to have a conversation. We're not going to have some abstract talk. We're going to send us an offer. Tell us how much money you're willing to pay. And he gave us an indication of what the minimum number would have to be in order to even have a discussion with Steven. And it's a big number. So we talked about it internally, and we decided, we should do that. We should send over an opening offer, a non-binding term sheet that takes a stab at what we think that minimum number is going to be to get the conversation started so that we can sit down with Steven, so that we can see if there's a deal that'd be good for him and good for us. And that's what we did. We put together the term sheet, we sent it over, and we asked if we could get on the phone and have a conversation with Steven. I'm going to walk you through that document, what it says, what it doesn't say, some of how Steven represented it. I'm sure he feels like he was being accurate, but some of the things that he said are simply not true based on the text. And Steven's a very passionate guy. I think that he's doing his level best to stand against what he sees as an injustice, but there is no injustice in this document, as I think you'll see. And then I'll tell you what happened right after we sent the document when I finally did get on the phone with Steven. So first, here's the document, the non-binding confidential term sheet. I'm just going to walk you through it. Full transparency. This non-binding term sheet sets forth the basic deal points of a proposed content production and distribution agreement between the Daily Wire, LLC, a Texas limited liability company, and Steven Crowder via his loan out. So that if and when the parties elect to move forward with a long-form agreement, they can move quickly in preparing a definitive and binding agreement. That's just legalese. That means this is just a conversation starter, and we're obviously going to have a negotiation if we move forward, and a lot of these points are going to get beat up. And for those of you who've never been through a contract negotiation, well, that's how it works. When you send someone an offer, you don't send them everything that you're willing to say yes to, because there is going to be a negotiation, because agents and lawyers are going to get involved, because you can't read their mind and you don't know everything that will be important to them and everything that they'll want. You don't know even, some of their sort of non-negotiable points. And so you send over a loose offer, and then they're going to beat it up a little bit. They're going to say, well, this should be higher and this should be lower. And you're going to come back and say, no, we're going to stand firm here, but we're willing to compromise there. And over time, you either get to a deal or you don't get to a deal. But that's how a good faith negotiation always works. 100% of every interaction I've ever had with any talent, that's the process. And so here we go. Here was our offer. A 4-year initial term with 2-year renewal at DW's sole discretion. That just means Steven's going to work for DW for 4 years. And if it's going really well, DW can retain him for an additional 2 years. 2, the fee. And remember, this is the minimum number that we thought would get the conversation started with Steven. $50 million for the initial term, plus $25 million for the renewal term, if extended, paid in monthly installments. Like I say, a pretty big number, but we thought for a talent like Steven, this is probably the minimum number that's going to get us in the door so that we can sit down and talk to him. 3, production costs. This is important. We've never made a deal quite like the offer that we put in front of Steven, because Steven, very independent guy. I mean, all of our talent have very independent voices. Obviously, we can't tell them what to say. Candace says what she wants, and Jordan Peterson says what he wants, Ben, Michael. But Steven has always built in this protection for himself that he wants to actually produce his content. He doesn't want, most of our guys, they come to the studio and we turn on the cameras. We point the cameras, we point the lights. Steven likes to do that with his own team to just make doubly sure that no one's interfering with his content, not that we would. And so we anticipated that, and we said, Crowder will bear the burden of production, including all costs associated therewith, on all the content contemplated herein, except on the quarterly and annual content contemplated below. We'll get to that part a little bit later. It's kind of a novel concept. The quality of the production will be as good as or better than is currently existing content. This just, again, Steven's going to produce his own content. It has to be as good as the stuff that Steven's audience has come to expect from him. And that'll come out of the $50 million. So it's not like all of that $50 million goes right in Steven's pocket. He's going to use some of it to pay for producers and studio space and camera equipment and operators and lights, just like we're going to use some of the money that we make to pay for the infrastructure and the technology and the marketing and the legal and all the other parts that go into making a successful business. Revenue collection, that says we'll have the exclusive right to realize revenue in connection with all of his content and brand. We're paying you this guaranteed significant amount of money, $50 million. And for that, one of the things we're buying is the content, but we're also buying the right to monetize the content so that we can have a chance of making some money and not just spending money. What is the content? First, we broke this into daily, monthly, quarterly, and annual content. The daily content is going to be very obvious to you. He'll deliver a 1.5-hour Louder with Crowder audio-video show of a quality and kind consistent with the shows that he's currently producing, 4 days a week. That's 192 original episodes a year if you factor in 4 weeks of vacation, including all ad reads and promotions as requested by us. So he's going to continue to produce his show, his Louder with Crowder show, 4 days a week, 192 times a year. And that'll include us being able to put ads in it and promotions in it. They'll be filmed in studio daily, Monday through Thursday. At least 1 hour of them will be outside the paywall. That's much how Steven already operates. That's the part that goes out on podcasting. It's the part that goes out on YouTube. It's the part that goes out on Rumble. And at least 30 minutes inside the DW Plus paywall. So in the same way that right now he has his Piss Off YouTube segment that has historically been at Blaze, well, he would still do that same kind of concept. 30 minutes of the show would now be behind our paywall. Crowder can bank or pre-record a limited number of episodes upon our approval and reasonable discretion. Days without new original episodes will be scheduled in advance, subject to our reasonable approval. What's this about? Well, a guy like Crowder, in addition to his 4 weeks of vacation, there's just also going to be times where he, for whatever reason, maybe he's got a speech, maybe he's got a stand-up comedy gig somewhere around the country. If he were to come to us and say, hey, I can't really shoot a show on Thursday because I'm going to be doing this stand-up gig, that's fine. Let's shoot 2 episodes on Tuesday and we'll roll one of them out on Thursday. It's just giving us all the maximum flexibility to still make the episodes, but for Stephen to be able to live the other important parts of his life. 192 episodes. Obviously, there are 260 work days in a year. Most Americans work 260 days a year minus 10. That's 2 weeks of vacation. So they work about 250 work days a year. And we're telling Stephen, you've got to produce 192. So already, even to say 4 weeks of vacation, that is probably above average, but it doesn't really capture the reality of this, which is there are going to be, 60 days basically of the year where Fridays, we call them, where Stephen basically doesn't have to produce a show. And you may say, well, that's still a lot. And I know Stephen says that's more than even, network TV would ask for. Yeah, these are points that can be negotiated. I still think most people feel like, if you're only working 4 days a week and you get 4 weeks off every year and you can pre-schedule even additional time to be traveling by banking episodes, you would at least say, you may think, well, he needed to negotiate that and get it down to 170 or something. Sure, I thought he would. But it's certainly not unfair to expect someone that is making $50 million over the next 4 years to, work 192 days a year. That brings us to monthly content. What is monthly content? Well, at Daily Wire, our members are entitled to an all-access once a month with most of our talent. And that's where our members get to interact with them, sort of one-on-one, ask them questions. So we're saying once a month, he would have to do a 90-minute all-access and any promotions and ad reads that would go in that. Right now, there are no ad reads in all access, but again, you're giving yourself, it's a 4, possibly 6 year deal. You're giving yourself a little latitude for things to change. Quarterly content. We asked that Stephen would produce one major promo video and photo shoot coordinated by us for his content at the company. We would want him to 4 times a year come in and make a very well-produced promo, that gives us marketing assets to be able to go out and sell subscriptions, sell Mug Club, sell any merch that we were doing with him, sell the entire idea of DW Plus, and one backstage episode a quarter or other major live event and VIP experience. So, and annual content. This was a new concept. We said that Stephen would do one feature-length entertainment special. That's like a stand-up comedy special. And that Stephen would do one feature-length political special. And that's like a documentary like What is a Woman? This is something we're doing with all of our talent now. You saw it first with What is a Woman with Matt. Then in addition to his daily show, he brought us this amazing documentary. You saw it with Candace with Greatest Lie Ever Sold. And we've got a lot more projects like that in the work with our other talent now. It's really become an important part of our business model. Here's the key, though. He doesn't have to pay for that out of his $50 million over the next 4 years. We would pay an additional amount every year for that. In the case of the political documentary, we'd give another $1.25 million of production costs. In the case of the entertainment, depends on how it breaks down, but we'd give between $500,000 and $2.5 million more dollars. So, you're talking about just this is more than 8 figures over the 4 years, in addition to the 50 over the next 4 years. And then E, additional Crowder content. What is this? I don't know, but presumably over the next 4 to 6 years, we might come up with other things that either he wants to do or we want to do. So we built a sort of catch-all bucket. If we and Crowder mutually agree to create additional content not currently contemplated, then we'd pay him $15,000 a day for that shoot. And again, a lot of that would be days he was already shooting, so that's just a little extra money in his pocket if we do something extra. Item 6, the back catalog. Crowder will license his entire back catalog, including without limitation every past episode of Louder with Crowder, to us during the term. That just means that all the episodes that already exist would also be behind our paywall during the term. At the end of the term, all of that content that we didn't actually pay for would revert to Crowder at the end of the term. But we would have it in the meantime. 7, ad reads and promo reads. DW will have the exclusive right to sell ads on the Crowder content on all platforms, channels, websites, apps, widgets, pages, and lists owned, branded, or controlled by us. and on any Crowder-owned or controlled social channels, email lists, websites, etc., including louderwithcrowder.com. And it says remuneration for that is included in the fee. So what does this mean? Well, this is just how are we going to make, first, that at least bare minimum $50 million, and if you count the other things we were talking about, 60 plus million, plus we knew he was going to negotiate, so you're probably talking about 70, 75 million, plus infrastructure, plus marketing, at least $100 million we would have ended up spending over the next 4 years. Well, how are we going to pay for all of that? Well, one way is we're going to sell ads on all this content. And you know this is how we handle all of our shows. He has to, item B, Crowder will read the ad copy and promos as requested by us, though he'll have certain rights to disapprove of some ad sponsors for various reasons, right? He can disapprove of like 10% of the ones we bring him. He can disapprove if he owns equity in a direct competitor of one of the advertisers that we bring him. But point D, if he doesn't read the requested ads within that framework, then the content that he made won't be counted as delivered under the contract, because it's all fine and good that he made a piece of content, but if we can't make any money off of it, then we're just paying him so that he can make a show. We're not paying him so that we can participate in any of the success of that show. 8, ownership. This is a very important point. Daily Wire will own all of the content created herein and will own all of the DW created channels and brands created by us during the term. And to be clear, we can exploit those channels, brands, and content in perpetuity at our sole discretion. What does this mean? Well, it means just like all of the back catalog that Crowder would have been bringing over, we would have a license to have that all over at Daily Wire Plus during the 4 to 6 years that Crowder was here. But at the end of that 4 to 6 years, he would take all that content with him. A little bit different with the content that we're paying, tens of millions of dollars for during the course of that content would always stay with us. We would have a sort of perpetual right to monetize that content even after Crowder would leave. And if Matt Walsh were to leave the Daily Wire, presumably at some date in the future, well, what as a woman would stay here? It was we paid for that. We paid for the marketing of it, the production of it. We paid him for the time in which he created it. And so this contemplates something very similar. We would still have the right to the things that we make. As far as channels and brands, I'll get to that in just a minute because it's addressed more deeply as we go. Adaptation rights. All this says is that anything that Crowder says on any of this content, we can adapt it down into written content and put it up at dailywire.com. So, we already do a lot of this. You transcribe something that Ben says, you transcribe something that Michael Knowles says, and we can put that out as an article. They don't actually have to do the work of rewriting their thoughts. 10, additional DW rights, merch rights. It says DW will maintain the exclusive right to create and sell Crowder and Crowder content branded merchandise, and the remuneration for that's already included in the fee. So one of the ways that we can make money, put ads in a show. One of the ways that we can make money, sell subscriptions around his content. One of the ways that we can make money is be responsible for his merch. Now that would mean that we have to pay for the creation of the merch, pay for the marketing of the merch, but we would own the upside. Email list. DW will maintain the exclusive right to manage, grow, and monetize all Crowder email lists during the term. We have an enormous team here at the Daily Wire, and some of them full-time think about email. So that's a burden that we would take off of Stephen, having to manage his own email list, just like we manage and pay the expenses on the merch. But we'll get the upside of that. Remember, we're trying to fill that 50, 60, 70, $100 million hole and to make profit. And the profit gets poured back in so that we can pay for all the infrastructure, all the technology, and all the other ways that we're fighting the fight. Social media management. This one was something that Stephen seemed particularly aggravated by in his video, although I don't understand why. It says DW will have the exclusive right to manage, curate, and monetize his official Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Snapchat, Rumble, and other social media accounts, excluding his existing personal Twitter and Instagram accounts. So why would we exclude some but not exclude others? Well, we're saying that during the term, we have, of course, he puts his podcast on Apple Podcast. We're the ones monetizing the Apple Podcast. So this is just making clear that, yes, we're selling ads in his podcast. The podcast goes out on Apple Podcast. That revenue comes back to us. We put something up on Facebook. Same thing. We bring in ad revenue off of that Facebook piece of content. But we're going to own that during the term. Obviously, at the end of the term, he's going to get his official Facebook account back. He's going to get his official YouTube account back. He's going to get his official Apple Podcast channel back. But during the term, again, all those people behind us, we've got experts in every one of these platforms, how to optimize it, how to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. And we'll manage that and we'll collect the revenue. But not as Twitter and Instagram, because those are very personal channels. You can't manage someone's Twitter. I can't speak for Candace Owens. I can't speak for Ben Shapiro. If only I could, I would like what they say a lot more. I mean, as you know about Daily Wire, we have a lot of disagreements sometimes between our hosts. Presumably, if I could control everything that they say, there'd never be any disagreements. They would just all be right all the time like I am. But that's not the case. We're saying, of course, he needs to control his own Twitter voice. Of course, he needs to include his own Instagram account. We get this a lot where people are like, Jordan's Twitter has changed since he joined Daily Wire Plus. I have nothing to do with Jordan Peterson's Twitter account. I don't have login credentials for his Twitter account. I've never asked him to tweet anything or not tweet anything. That'd be way outside of the bounds of what's acceptable because that's a very personal medium, Twitter, very personal medium, Instagram. It also says that we will have the perpetual and exclusive right to create, own, manage, curate, and monetize any and all social media accounts that we create based on Crowder's content or shows. What's that about? Well, Crowder already has enormous social channels. He got like 6 million YouTube followers or something. I mean, he's one of the biggest voices in the movement. But what happens if we create a documentary like What is a Woman? Well, sure, you've got Matt's Facebook and Matt's YouTube that are promoting What is a Woman. But we may also want to build a Twitter account, that is at What is a Woman, or a YouTube account that's just for clips from What is a Woman. Well, that wouldn't belong to Matt. That would belong to us because What is a Woman belongs to us. And that's what this was meant to say, that all of the stuff that Crowder brings over, that's his, Louder with Crowder and all, his Louder with Crowder accounts, all of that. Well, that's his. We're going to manage it for him during the term. We're going to monetize it during the term. At the end of the term, all of that's going to go back to him. He said that was not what it says in his video that he released, but you can read right here. That's exactly, he gets all of, it's only during the term that we control that. But the things that we make based on the content that we make, well, that belongs to us because the content belongs to us. And so those channels have to belong to us. Those would never match anything like the magnitude of the channels he's created for himself, obviously. 11, exclusivity. Should go without saying, if you're going to pay somebody $50 million, you're going to have exclusivity. They can't go make content for people who compete with you. You don't pay someone to go work for the competition. But there's carve-outs. Of course, he can go do non-regular guest appearances if Tucker wants to have him on, if Fox and Friends wants to have him on, if he wants to go do a hit with Glenn Beck or something, he can go do that. He should use good faith efforts to coordinate them with us. And this is important. See, he won't have the right to run any personal subscription or donation effort. He can't have a Patreon or a Locals or any sort of paid fan club while Mug Club is part of DW+, right? We're the ones who are going to own subscription revenue during the term. So I think all this is very fair and very obvious to anyone. You wouldn't pay somebody $50 million to then compete with, have them work for your competitor, and you wouldn't pay them $50 million to have them compete directly against you. Now, here's this section that I know Stephen was very offended by, and I think he misunderstood and therefore misrepresented. Fee reductions. There's a different fee reduction for all those kinds of contents we created. Daily content. If he fails for any reason to deliver 192 episodes of The Daily Show, or if he fails to include the ads that we agreed to or the promotions that we agreed to in those episodes, then we'll give a $100,000 reduction every time. What's that about? Well, again, you can't pay someone any amount of money, but you certainly can't pay them an unimaginably huge amount of money for their show and then not get the show. So what this is saying is you don't have to produce a show every day. You don't have to produce 260 or 250 or 240 or 230 or 220 or 210 episodes a year. You got to produce 192 episodes a year. You can film some of them in advance. You can stack them up. All of that's contemplated in there. You could shoot on a Friday so that you can take 2 days off next week. But if you don't give us 192 episodes, we can't pay you the same amount of money as if you did give us 192 episodes. So this is just, you give us 192 times 4 minus 1, then out of your 50 million, we're hitting minus 100,000. Stephen said that this was unfair, that if he had a sick day or got in a car wreck, we'd dock him $100,000. But I think that's just totally inaccurate for two reasons. One, presumably if he was sick this Tuesday, he could just shoot an episode next Friday and you'd be completely even. He's got an awful lot of extra time in the year to shoot these additional, to shoot any episodes to make up. And second of all, it's actually contemplated a little bit later what happens if there's a disability. In fact, we'll just skip right to it. It's item E. In the event of temporary disability or serious illness that prevents Crowder from performing, the fee will be reduced on a pro rata basis, not subject to the fee reduction mentioned above. What does that mean? Well, instead of a sort of punitive fee because he's choosing not to do the right thing, in that situation, you'll just reduce it by dividing the total amount of money contemplated, by the number of episodes, just subtract that, which I think is, again, incredibly fair. If you're being paid $1 for every box you deliver 10 boxes, you get $10. If you deliver 9 boxes, you get $9. That's a different concept than if you just choose not to deliver it, in which case we're going to subtract a little bit extra. And again, you pay somebody $50 million, you should get the work. Monthly and quarterly content, well, this is more valuable content and there's less of it, so the fee is higher, $250,000 if he misses that kind of content. Annual content, well, this is the most important, most expensive content. If you were supposed to have done a complete documentary this year and you didn't deliver it, well, we're going to subtract $1 million because that's one of the most important high-value pieces of content that we asked you to make that year. And then D just says reset. The fee reduces each calendar year. So, every year you kind of start over fresh. That brings us to 13, reduction of fee from lost revenue or boycotts. Again, this is one of the points that Stephen really focused on. He says we're enforcers for big tech, that we're doing big tech's bidding, that we're punishing content creators if they run afoul of big tech. And first of all, that's just personally incredibly offensive. It's incredibly offensive to have your friend and ally in 10 years of fighting this fight alongside one another, coming up together, say that you're not sufficiently conservative, say that you're I think he said in the video that we're worse than the left, that we're doing harm to the conservative audience and harm to the country, that we're not sufficiently at odds with big tech. Obviously that's ridiculous. You'll see that it's ridiculous as we go through this and I explain it. It's absurd on its face. We get content strikes all the time. We get demonetized all the time. We get shadow banned all the time, just like all conservatives do. We're investing tens of millions of dollars every year into technology to try to create alternatives. That's a long-term project. No one has built anything. Rumble is not a true competitor to YouTube yet. I hope that they become one. But right now, YouTube has many billions of people use YouTube and many millions of people use Rumble. It's a long-term investment to build these alternatives, and Daily Wire Plus is an alternative platform. But right now, we all still are dependent for getting our message out to have access to big tech and to monetize our content. We have to have access to big tech. That's where the audience is, and it's where the money is. It's also where Stephen Crowder has made his entire name. He's the biggest conservative YouTube star of all time. He put out his video criticizing us in this contract as not being sufficiently conservative. The number one place people will view it is on YouTube. And that's not wrong. That's where people are. Of course they're going to watch it on YouTube. Of course he's going to put it out on YouTube. That's where the audience is. Now, Stephen might respond by saying, yes, but I don't make any money off of YouTube. I have been demonetized there. And that's a point that we'll talk about here. Nevertheless, obviously, you and I and everyone else, when we go to YouTube to watch Stephen Crowder may be demonetized and he may not make any money. YouTube, though, still makes money off of us. And so in that way, Stephen is still driving success for YouTube. It's unfortunate that YouTube has chosen to cut him out of participating in that success. In fact, I think YouTube is utterly wrong. The only time I've ever talked to the CEO of YouTube, it was to criticize her for her treatment of Stephen Crowder. I didn't even talk to her about the Daily Wire. I had nothing to say at that moment about Daily Wire, but at that time they had demonetized Stephen, and I used my one audience with one of the most powerful CEOs in the world to tell her that what she was doing to Stephen Crowder was absolutely unethical and wrong. So what were we trying to accomplish with this section? Well, let's go through it. The reduction of fee from lost revenue from boycotts, content strikes, or bans from major social media platforms. A, ad drop. If Crowder is boycotted or dropped by more than 50% of his then extant advertising partners. That is, if 50% of the money that he's making from advertisers is suddenly gone, and we're not able to replace that revenue within 90 days, then his fee will be reduced by 25% until such time as the ad revenue has been restored for a period of 90 days, and then it would all reset. Stephen says, all the left does is boycott our advertisers, so this just says to the left, your boycotts work and we'll enforce it for you. We will punish the content creator for you. But this isn't about punishing the content creator. This is about if the Daily Wire is going to leverage, I can't stress it, probably $100 million by the time you have marketing and infrastructure costs, by the time you pay for all the legal compliance, all the technology that it takes to support Stephen's show and Stephen's show, even at the price that we offered for it, which he would have wanted much more, at least $100 million. Obviously, if the show makes dramatically less money, well, then Stephen has to make less money because we're making less money. And I brought this up to Stephen on the phone, and I said, Stephen, if your show, if we guarantee you $1 for your show, and the show makes $1 in ad revenue and $1 in subscription revenue, then how does the money work? Well, it works that $2 come in, you get your guaranteed $1, we get $1. What do we do? What do you do with your $1? Well, you produce your show and you pay yourself. What do we do with our $1? Well, we market your show, provide all the back-end infrastructure, pay for the 250 plus humans who work to make all of this continue to grow. By the way, we don't pay for one single person more than we need. There's no charity jobs. We're not giving our money away. If anything, we're understaffed by 50%. We ask more of our employees than any other company probably in America today. We drive people incredibly hard because our resources are limited and because we're trying to accomplish so much for our values, for our movement. So we pay for that out of our $1, and then we pay ourselves. But that's how it works. I said, if the next day one of the dollars, the ad dollar, goes away, now what happens? Should it be that you said something on your show that caused that $1 to go away? Now you keep your $1 and we make $0? I said, that wouldn't make any sense. Obviously, you would have to lose a little and we would have to lose a little. I said, we're trying to sort of emulate the idea of a joint venture. And Stephen said, no, you should lose all the money. It's your business. And I said, well, Stephen, how would we have a business? Why would we be in business? And how would we stay in business? And Stephen, this is a very important point. Stephen, again, I think the most entertaining, talented person in the conservative movement. I think one of the most entertaining and talented people in entertainment generally in the country today, has created a very successful content generation company, a very successful production company. But Stephen's never had to create the company that actually distributes, markets, and monetizes all of that content. He talks in his video about being one of the only true independent conservative voices. And I find that incredibly offensive. Stephen, the whole time I've known him, has worked for someone else. Has been paid by someone else. That doesn't mean other people tell him what to say. He's a very independent voice, and that's good. So is Matt Walsh. So is Candace Owens. So is Ben Shapiro. So is Michael Knowles. So is Brett Cooper. But Stephen, as much or more than any of them, a very independent voice. But he's not exactly a self-made man. That's not true. He was paid by PJTV when I met him, which was owned by a billionaire at the time. Then he was paid by CRTV for a number of years, which was owned by a billionaire at the time. Then he was paid by The Blaze, which was subsidized by a billionaire, until Tyler Cardon, one of the real genius businessmen in our movement, turned the company around and made it profitable. During all of that time, Stephen drove a ton of revenue. He's incredibly valuable. I'm not suggesting that he wasn't driving value. He was. I'm only saying he didn't have to build all of that. He didn't have to think about it. And he didn't necessarily have to be profitable. And he doesn't know for a fact that he was profitable because, as he has said very publicly, all those companies, none of them really shared all the information about what was happening with them. So Stephen feels very certain that his show was always profitable, but he doesn't know that his show was profitable. And even if it was, what became of that profit? Most of that profit almost certainly was reinvested into growing the infrastructure and growing the technology and growing the marketing and growing the compliance. That's how business works. And if you're the Daily Wire, we're a very successful company by conservative media standards, and we're a tiny fraction of the smallest legacy media company. If we're going to make one of the biggest investments we've ever made in talent, which is what we were offering Crowder here, an amount of money that puts all of our investments at risk. I mean, if it doesn't work, you're not going to be able to make that kids' entertainment content. You're not going to be able to make that those movies and TV shows. You're not going to be able to continue to do things like sue the federal government to stop the vax mandate. You're not going to be able to do things like deploy investigative journalists to Virginia where they uncover the Loudon story that changes the course of a gubernatorial election. All of that takes resources. When you leverage 50, 60, 70, $100 million, you're taking an enormous risk. You're putting all of that at risk. You don't do it cavalierly. You do it because you believe, and I do, that Stephen is worth it, that he's incredibly valuable. But it is still a huge risk. There's also a time factor. He might drive all that revenue, but what if it takes a year or even 18 months to bring over those Mug Club subscribers, to get those advertisers spending, right? Well, you're losing 8 figures a year in the interim or 7 figures a year in the interim while you're doing that. So you can't just say, we're going to pay you $50 million even if the show doesn't bring in any money. That's not punishment. First of all, $50 million minus 25% is not punishment by the standards of any human being in the world today, right? That's not punishment. That's just reality. He would still be being paid millions and millions of dollars, and we would be actively working with all those people that we're paying out of our cut to go find new advertisers to replace it, at which point he would be making his money again. Same with the content strike. If any major platform, YouTube, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, issues a content strike such that Crowder's content cannot be monetized on the platform, then again, there's this 90-day concept, and again, there's this 25% reduction. Now, Stephen, when I spoke to him, he was very upset. He said, I've already been demonetized on YouTube. That's the kind of thing in a negotiation. You scratch through that with your red pen and you say, Stephen's already been demonetized from YouTube, so we can't start the deal at minus 25. You have to already have anticipated that, and that would have been fine. That's just a very common. But if he were making a significant portion of his revenue on YouTube and he lost that revenue, it's not punishing him to say you will make less. We're all going to make less. The real punishment would be if we took all the hit, continued to pay him guaranteed money, whether his show makes money or not, and then we lose the business as a result. And now no one pays Stephen anything, and no one releases Stephen's content. He has to go build it all from scratch in crisis. Ban. The Crowder content cannot be released on any of the major platforms because of his content being banned from those platforms. Then we'll reduce the fee if YouTube 20, if Apple 20, if Facebook 10, if Spotify 10. Same kind of concept. If the content simply cannot appear and therefore cannot not only be used for marketing, cannot be used to grow the brand, also can't be monetized, well, we can't pay him the same as if it was. If you're making 25% of your money on YouTube and now YouTube is permanently gone, you can't make that money anymore. It's not punishment. And this is really what it comes down to. Stephen's philosophy seems to be, I deserve to be paid millions and millions and millions of dollars, whether my show drives the revenue or not. That's not a business relationship. He's not looking for a business relationship. He's looking for a benefactor. The Daily Wire is not a nonprofit. We aren't benefactors. We're a business. We only get to eat what we kill. And at the very beginning, we thought maybe we could do like a joint venture with Stephen where we have the same relationship. There's no guarantee of money. And if there's more money, he gets a cut. And if there's less money, he gets a cut. But we knew, no, Stephen, at his level, his history, his experience, he just needs a big guarantee. He's earned it. But we still have to replicate in the deal some measure of that shared responsibility. And that's all this was meant to accomplish. You say, well, it's the same in the end anyway, because you're still telling him, if you say something YouTube doesn't like, we're taking away your money. Well, no, if YouTube would be the one taking away the money. We're just saying that we can't bear the entire brunt of that. But it's even, I think what Stephen's suggesting here is kind of even more disingenuous than that, because I actually kind of came up with this whole concept by watching Steven Crowder. I mean, I mentioned it before. Stephen created this idea of Piss Off YouTube segment at Mug Club. And I saw it and thought it was genius. What does it mean? It means Stephen can go on YouTube, speak to a huge audience. In fact, most of his audience, that's where they engage with him, right? The subscribers are a very small percentage of Stephen's audience. Mug Club is a very small percentage of his audience. YouTube is the vast, overwhelming majority of Stephen's audience. He can go on there and he can be risque and he can do what he wants to do, but he can be calculated too. And he can say, there are some things that I simply can't say here because these bastards hate free speech. For those things, come over to Mug Club and become a subscriber. And then for 30 minutes a day at the Blaze, he could say whatever he wanted. And I thought that was a genius thing, and I implemented it at Daily Wire because I was inspired by Stephen, who again, very talented guy, very smart guy. This is just meant to say the same thing. Hey, I want you to be thoughtful about what you say on the free part of the show. Doesn't mean I want you to say things that aren't true. Doesn't mean I want you to say things you don't believe. Doesn't mean I want you to bend the knee to big tech. What it means is I want you to preserve the revenue as best you can, preserve the audience as best you can, and then tell people there's a reason we're building these multi-million dollar platforms. There's a reason we have subscribers. It's so that there is a place where they can't take our voice away. They can't tell us what to say. So what should he do? He should go on YouTube. He should talk about the things that he talks about. And then he should say, listen, there's some new study came out about the COVID vaccine, and I want to talk about it, but these bastards at YouTube won't let me. Come over to Mug Club at Daily Wire Plus. Go over there and talk about it. And in that way, we keep growing his brand, bigger and bigger audience, more and more people. We have those revenue opportunities, and Stephen is free to say the things he wants to see. I don't know why when he read this, he couldn't see that. I don't know why when we talked about it after the fact, and he was very upset with me, he couldn't see it. But I find it deeply offensive that he won't give me the benefit of the doubt, and even more offensive that he felt that he needed to air our disagreement about this section publicly. Stephen's my friend. He's my ally. It's just a low move, and I'm sure he thinks he's standing on principle. The problem is, you might even think that, first of all, friendship is a principle. You might think, yeah, but some things have to be more important in the public space than friendship. I don't know if that's true, but let's say that it is true. You have to be right if you're going to burn one of your friends the way that Stephen burned us. And Stephen is wrong. I am not an enforcer for big tech. I am trying to maximize the reach and revenue of my hosts and my company, because no company spends more money than the Daily Wire directly marketing its talent. We spend tens of millions of dollars every year helping our talent grow, marketing our talent with real dollars. We spend tens of millions more building technology, tens of millions more on staff and support, building expertise, so that we can, over time, build a completely parallel system, a completely parallel economy. That is not a day's work. That is a generation's work. That is the work that we are engaged in. That's why we've had so many successes. You have been with us for so many of those successes. And I feel like Crowder really threw us under the bus and cheapened that and discredited all of it in saying that we're enforcers for the very people who hate us, the very people who shadow ban us and demonetize us and give content strikes against us all the time, when all we're saying is, no, let's be smart about how we fight them. The rest of this document, you're welcome to read it. It's just legalese, and what it says is, if we decide to move forward, this isn't the whole document. We're going to have a longer document. We're going to have to negotiate these topics. Confidentiality. We're not going to tell people about the deal. He didn't sign this, so he doesn't have those confidentiality requirements, although I certainly expected some political or, personal and professional courtesy of him not going and reaming us publicly for making him an offer that he didn't like. I don't owe Stephen a job, and Stephen doesn't owe me a show. We opened up a conversation in good faith. We made an offer. He didn't like it. Now he's burning us. That brings me actually to what happened after. I sent this over. I did get on the phone with Stephen. Normally, this is the stage where you say, I like this, I don't like that, red line, and we move closer together. Instead, Stephen said, I'm not going to redline this. Not going to have my agent respond. This deal is garbage. You need to start completely over. I said, well, I'd like to talk through why we do it. And he listened for a little bit, and he said, well, you're just wrong. You don't know anything about business. My business model is the right business model. And of course, that's unfair because Stephen hasn't run this part of a business before. Stephen likes to say, I'm only on the air because of Mug Club. But Stephen couldn't tell me how many subscribers he had. I said, how many subscribers do you have at the Blaze? He said, I don't know. They don't tell me. And I'm sure that's true. He said, but I'm confident, I guarantee you it'll be $350,000 on day one with no marketing. I hope that's true. But I can't take that risk. I've never seen that to be true. I've never launched any talent with $0 spent on marketing and picked up a third of the total subscribers that the entire Daily Wire has built in 8 years in business. I hope Stephen's right. I hope he makes unseemly amounts of money and is able to continue being an important voice in the movement for years and years to come. But that's not a risk that I could take. Stephen implied that he not only didn't like this $12.5 million a year number that I offered him, but that he thought it should be closer to $30 million a year. That's $120 million over 4 years just for Stephen's show. I would still have to spend those tens of millions of dollars every year that I told you about on things like marketing and infrastructure and technology to support the show, the part that Stephen's never done. As soon as he said that, I knew we'll never get to a deal. I can't guarantee $30 million a year. I didn't know how I was going to pay for 50. I thought, not that he isn't worth it, but that's a big risk. $120 million is an incalculable risk for a company our size. And again, I'm not saying Stephen isn't worth it. I hope he is. I hope he builds his own business. He'll make a ton of mistakes. He'll find out that he's wrong about a lot of how the business world works. He'll learn and he'll grow because he's a smart, talented guy. And I hope he gets to a place where he's proving me wrong and he's making all that money. But that just was not a deal that the Daily Wire could possibly make. And we'd have to pay it even if he lost all the revenue, or even if he lost enormous chunks of the revenue. It was just an impossible situation. And so Stephen said, we're going to throw this deal out. I'm not even going to mark it up. I'm not going to negotiate it. Start over. Send me a new deal. And because of his talent and because of our friendship, I thought about it for a minute. Talked to my partners about it for a few minutes. And then I just realized what I already knew in my heart, which is Stephen's not a team player. That's not a knock. He has an enormous individual talent. But he's not going to be happy unless he's out on his own. And so I called him up. I said, hey, we're not going to send a follow-up offer. I want you to hear it directly from me, not from lawyers and agents. I said, but the kind of deal you're looking for is not the kind of deal that we can make. He was super gracious, appreciative, kind. We agreed to continue forward as we always had as friends. We do favors for each other. I told him, if you stay at the Blaze or if you go off on your own, go to Rumble, go wherever, we're going to continue to write stories about you and promote you and have you on. Like, you know, we want you to be as successful as humanly possible, and we want to contribute to that. And we went our separate ways. And months went by. October goes by, November goes by, December goes by. And then a week ago, in January, Stephen called me. And he said, hey man, I can't unsee this contract that you sent me. And I said, well, it's not a contract, it's a non-binding term sheet. It's a conversation starter, but okay. And he told me his perspective on it, that we were not paying him what he's worth, that we don't understand his great business mind, and that it's going to go exactly the way that he thinks, and we're all going to be proven wrong. And I said, again, I hope that's true, Stephen, but that's not a risk I can take. And then he said, and you're just an enforcer for big tech. You're hurting young talent. I said, well, Stephen, first of all, no two talent in our company have the same deal. Every deal is different because there's different circumstances. This is the kind of deal you make to protect a 9-figure investment. You can't pay 9 figures in expenses, even if the revenue dries up. That isn't possible. It's not prudent, but it also isn't possible. And he wouldn't let it go. He was very angry. And I got very flustered. I didn't expect him to be calling and laying into me the way he was. I'd never experienced it before. I didn't make the best defense of the deal that I probably could have because I was so caught off guard. I mean, I made a decent defense of the structure of it, but I was really taken aback. And then I told him, well, I'll take it under consideration, bud. And we got off the phone. And then I wake up yesterday and he puts out this video laying into us the way that he did. And, you know, he redacted parts of the document. He didn't name us by name. And I'm sure on some level that was meant as a courtesy. But all it really did was create suspicion in our audience. I know a lot of you have been out there defending us, saying, well, this couldn't have possibly been the Daily Wire. And I don't want to be the guy who 3 weeks later, Stephen or someone else says that it was the Daily Wire and you feel betrayed. Like, why'd these guys leave me out to dry? I appreciate your impulse to defend us. but we don't need to be defended. This is a fair offer. It's an offer that would have been negotiated. I would have paid him more. The fees would have been lower. Fee would have gone up. Penalties would have gone lower. Number of workdays probably would have shrank. He would have done a little bit less content, and we would have inched our way like this, either to a deal or not to a deal. That's not how Stephen chose to operate. And now we find ourselves here where we're having this public dispute. I'm having a public dispute with my friend of the last decade, which is one of the saddest things I've ever faced in public and professional life. It's just a horrible thing, but I do owe it to those of you who are out there defending us. I owe it to Daily Wire Plus subscribers to say, yeah, it was our offer. I'm proud of the offer. I think it was innovative. I think it was meant to make sure that we could mutually succeed. I don't need to tell you that we're committed to fighting the left. We fight the left as hard as anyone. You might say, well, you guys are wrong sometime. Ben was wrong about this one time, and you were wrong about that one time. And yeah, we don't claim to not make mistakes. This actually isn't one of our mistakes. This is a great, respectable offer that we made to a good friend of ours, a mega talent, and now it's been misconstrued and is being wielded against us kind of as a cudgel. And so just wanted to be transparent with you about it. I'm proud of the deal. I'm proud of what we do at the Daily Wire. I'm proud of the fact that we publish diverse voices that don't always agree with each other, and that means that you're not always going to agree with everything that every one of us says. But I can tell you with a clear face, I'll put our conservative bona fides up against anybody. I'll put our hard work, determination, and success rate up against anybody. And I'll put our audience and our fans and our Daily Wire Plus members up against anybody, any day. We are moving the ball forward. And it's unfortunate that Stephen said otherwise. So what should you do? Should you run over and cancel your Mug Club subscription? Should you go attack Stephen in the comments? Should you? No, none of that. In fact, if you're not a subscriber to Mug Club, you should head over to mugclubforever.com right now and subscribe. Stephen's one of the most important voices and most talented voices in the movement today. We need him to succeed. We need him to be big. We need his, whatever he does next, to be huge. You just need to know that he was wrong about this. You need to know that we didn't betray you. We didn't betray the conservative movement. We didn't. We won't. We'll keep fighting. And with your help, we'll keep winning.